Hey, everybody, what is going on? This is Scott Garber back in the saddle of the Profluent Sports Podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the global and galactic sporting space. Excited to welcome our next founder, Philip Hover-Smoot, the founder and CEO of the Atlas Cup. Philip, my man, I am so excited for this conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, excited for you to be here. And for all you first-time listeners, we typically dive into, the innovation of sport, who's shaping the future landscape. And today we're going to blast this thing outer space. We're going to be talking about something I'm quite certain you guys have never heard of, but is on the horizon of the future. Philip, it's not my story to tell. So to kick things off, give the listeners a little context to who you are and where this idea of the Atlas Cup was born from.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, again, thank you for having me on. But to give the listeners kind of the context, I'm introducing professional sports to space, right? So it's this phenomenal idea of uncrewed satellites racing head to head in low Earth orbit. It's the fastest sport in history the moment we go off and go execute in 2028, if not sooner. And it's going to be a phenomenal event. But I come to it from a really weird background. So I'm an attorney by trade, and I came up for the last decade through the defense industry and space industry, doing a whole bunch of different stuff, eventually leading up to a role as a CEO of a space-based optics company for the last couple of years. So we were doing big performant cameras and telescopes almost exclusively for the intelligence community and the military, customer ecosystem. And that was really the moment of like, okay, cool. If we can go create imagery, we can go create content. How do we do it? How does it work? What does the licensing look like? What does that open up? What's the commercial opportunity there? And that's what's really interesting. So again, I've been in the space industry for about a decade. I've done everything. I've done $1 billion in launch deals. I've done a couple $100 million in satellite deals. I've built and flown and designed and licensed and operated satellites. I've touched the whole thing, but everyone today is really focused on defense needs. And I've had this kind of gnawing need to go off and go understand, well, look, space is more than that. It's not just war fighting and spy satellites. There's real fun that can be had. And it sounds maybe a little trivial, but it's not trivial, right? Fun, content, entertainment, social engagement, the cultural elements of these things are really, really important. And I look at space like the new West, right? It's the Western frontier, but for the 21st century. And entertainment was part of that story in the development of the West. So I see this as a huge untapped ecosystem. So sports in space, media in space is really just the natural combination of all of that infrastructure, right? And we've seen now even just this absolute blossoming in the last 5 years of space infrastructure, all the companies building satellites, SpaceX, all the rockets. We're kind of right at that internet point, right? Where you've got all the infrastructure and people are starting to build the applications on top of it, right? And that's where I come in. I'm taking everything that I've learned, combining it with the most recent trends in sports, the new league formats, how people are consuming sports content, and I'm putting it together. I'm going to introduce the world to the first truly orbital sport.
I mean, Phil, it's absolutely incredible. And as I'm listening to you, you use the internet, right? And I think about the gold rush, right? And so much of this is wrapped around, having the right technology, having the right audience, but most importantly, the belief that there's something on the other side, right? And so we watch a lot of founders building new companies, trying to go ahead and test one of those three. I'm curious, as you've been in this seat now for the last 4 or 5 months, maybe it sounds a little Looney Tune when you first hear it. And then as soon as you start talking, you're like, oh, there's something there. What has that been like in building the belief that space is the new frontier and marrying that with something that's not just, space Trek or, Star Trek, but reality?
Yeah. Totally. No. And that's been the most amazing thing possible, right? So even in the lead up to this, right? And I think, before we started recording, I was telling you, right, I've had this idea. I've been working on it and tinkering on it for about 5 or 6 years, to get to the point of being comfortable to quit my job as the CEO of another space company to go start the first professional sport in space took, some time, right? I had to wrap my mind around this is an insane idea. It's admittedly big, but I kind of from the operator side, from the space industry side, I understand that it's all there. All this tech exists. I don't have to design anything, test anything. None of this is sci-fi. This is all commercially available, right? There's dozens of companies building these satellites, if not 100 plus. It's 450 companies building propulsion systems, the motors for satellites, right? The optics exist, the tracking exists, the cameras are there, the onboard capabilities are there. Everything exists. I'm just going to stitch it together, right? But I had to be realistic that the world doesn't necessarily know that. I know that because I've been in the industry, right? I know the state of the art. I know what people can do, but the average Joe Schmo fan potential out there doesn't have any idea what's going on in space, right? They don't, most people don't even know that we're putting up a rocket basically every single day out of the US with tons of satellites on board. That is just kind of taken as a given now, but people don't really understand it. So I
Yeah.
had to come to terms with the fact that I was going to quit my job as CEO and I was going to start this crazy thing. And then I was going to have doors slammed in my face for the first 6 to 12 months. And I had to kind of like mentally get myself prepped for that, to be okay with it, and to know that, like, okay, fine, right? You're going to get a bunch of no's and eventually we're going to get some yeses. Then we're going to build on that. That didn't happen. This is why this is so phenomenal is I started back in January kissing babies and shaking hands, going to events, talking to people, building this up. And it has been nothing but a positive response. We've had a couple companies here and there that, of course, been like, hey, look, cool idea, but like, we're focused on defense world or intelligence world, and like, commercial ecosystem stuff just isn't for us. Like, totally fine. Don't worry about that. But 98% of people we've talked to, both on the sports side and the space tech side, they've been supportive. They understand the vision. They understand the fact that this is executable. We've got dozens of partners already signed up to early deals. I've got 5 teams committed to go off and go race in 2028, including one that's raised over $1 billion and came to us to go participate in the racing ecosystem. We've got a spot filming on a top 3 national television show that's going to air at prime time in the second half of the year to 9 million people. Like, we have media attention, we have participant engagement, we've got sponsored conversations ongoing with top tier, top flight sponsors. Just one of them's booked for tomorrow morning, and that's phenomenal.
Wow.
We started that outreach 2 weeks ago, right? So we're at the point where we are 118 days old as a business with dozens of signed partner contracts, sponsor discussions ongoing, committed teams, and I get to pick up the phone and call people, and they're not laughing me off the call. They're saying, this is great. How do we participate? They understand that what I'm building is going to do for the space industry what professional racing did for the automotive industry. And if you think about that history early in the 20th century, as cars were coming online, as the production facilities and the production lines were starting to get built out, racing took hold very early. And that racing created a competitive ecosystem. It created this like culture of excellence in engineering that really permeated early automotive development. And that helped automotive become what it was, and it helped it scale. And we're right at that inflection point for space where, we've hit that point where there's enough realism there. There's enough money there that it's happening. There's no turning it off right now, right? There's Morgan Stanley says it's $1 trillion annual economy in like a couple of years. It's here, right? The question is now, how do we take advantage of it, and who is smart enough to go do it, and when do they do it? And that's,
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity here, right? No one's really touched this. I'm not, to be fair, the first person to look at doing sports in space. There've been a couple of other companies that have looked at it, but they've all had these very, to your point, kind of sci-fi ideas, right? Lunar buggy racing, or humans doing stuff in orbit. And like, that's cool. I'll watch it if they can produce it. But what I'm trying to do is take away all of that complexity and reduce this to something that sports fans know and understand. Top flight, head-to-head, high-tech racing, right? Think America's Cup or F1, right?
Yep.
And existing tech, meaning I don't want to have to build anything. This shouldn't be dependent upon developing anything. Nothing needs to be tested. Everything's real and proven today. So I'm trying to simplify it so I can go be first. And that's our entire mantra as a business, is first is everything, right? So the first person to go and actually produce a commercializable sports event in space owns the freaking market for a period of time. That's what I want. I'm a monopolist. I'm a capitalist. I'm here to go make money and create something awesome for fans. And to do that, I need to do it first. And I know how to do it. And I'm going to do it before anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sold 10 minutes into the podcast. I mean, and it makes sense, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, we see success leaves clues, right? And as we start to build out these leagues and properties, whether, like you said, it's a sailboat, a car, a robot, we understand from a consumer lens what we need to be able to put together. And it feels like we're at that natural inflection point, like the way we're consuming. And we're now watching this go far beyond the big 4, big 5 sports that we're used to consuming. Now it's sort of opened this whole thing up. So I want to level set here, right? And I want to make sure I understand this. Are these manned or woman crafts, or are these autonomous? Give us a little insight to what does this lower orbital race look like? And then we can start to piece the commercial elements to it on like, how does this actually become a league?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be very clear, initially we're talking about uncrewed, right? So no humans in the loop, right? So it's more initially around drone racing league than a crewed, sailcraft or something like that, right? So, and that's intentional, right? So it's not to say that we couldn't do a manned system today. totally have the technology. The problem is it's very expensive and it's hard to go off and go do. I couldn't go make that happen in 12 to 18 months, whereas uncrewed I can make happen in 12 to 18 months, right? Although, a quick aside, we do want to go race humans in space, right? We think the first time humans race in space, it's going to be the most watched sporting event in the history of sport. And I will die on that hill. That's my pitch to investors is I'm not building just the next sport. I'm building the biggest sport, right? I'm building the sport that in 50 years, it is the most watched, and not 50, call it 20, right? I mean, we can do this not that far off. That's what I'm building for, is this crawl, walk, run, building the foundation so that we're already there. We've already built the fan base. We've demonstrated it. We've built the content production stack so that when we get to the point of humans racing in space, every person with a smartphone on the planet will get that push notification saying, humans now racing in space, click here to watch. And every person on the planet will click that button because they're going to be like, oh my God, what is happening? So we're going there. So initially, though, drone racing league in space. So a maneuver-based competition, 2 different leagues, one professional featuring large performant chemical propulsion, like rocket-powered spacecraft effectively. Those are going to be like Mini Cooper-sized satellites, big, 250 kilogram plus satellites with large solar arrays doing high maneuverability competitions. So think, 1,000-kilometer altitude change in just a couple minutes. So really, really, really fast, very performant. Additionally, we're going to have a university league. We call it Atlas Cup Proving Grounds. We announced a couple weeks ago. We got 2 leading colleges, top 5 aero-astro engineering programs already committed to go off and go race. Have conversations with a bunch more ongoing. They're going to be smaller, less performant spacecraft because obviously universities don't have as much budget as large performant defense manufacturers do.
Sure.
But we're going to have those 2 things running in parallel. Same concept though. They're maneuver based, right? So in space, it's a little bit different because we call it head-to-head racing, but head-to-head in space doesn't really work like that. You can't pull ahead in the traditional sense. If you go faster next to someone, you just go higher because of how orbital dynamics work. So the maneuvering is actually very interesting. And I've got a team of engineers actually helping me right now create that initial race architecture and some explainer content that we're going to start releasing in about a month or so around what does the racing look like? How does the unique physics of space change what we're used to seeing in, more 2-dimensional type race formats that we're used to seeing on Earth? And there's going to be a bit of a translational gap there where people aren't familiar with it, but we're going to get them smart and we're going to produce a lot of content around it to go get them excited about it. And then from a production perspective, we're talking about traditional broadcast, right? But just shortened, right? So again, we are not initially going to be trying to produce a 2-hour live event. We want to get there eventually, and we're talking with some really interesting partners about doing live events. But initially, we're talking about short format content for social, mobile, and streaming platforms in our own proprietary web and app portal. But it's going to be the look and feel of what everyone wants to see, right? We are going to be modeled after and the same touch, feel, sound, aesthetic of any major premier sports property, just shorter content, right? So think talking heads in the booth narrating the race, ground-based imagery, ground-based visualization and tracking, onboard cameras. Those are great nowadays. Almost all these satellites are flying 4, 5, 4K cameras already. So we'll have onboard imagery. We're going to have Overwatch imagery from another satellite. Think the helicopter following around an F1 track or a drone. Same thing. We're just going to do it in space. And then we're going to go produce a lot of short format content. And then we're going to provide constant updates and behind the scenes interviews, technical explainers. We're going to produce a lot of stuff here because we need to kind of, we're new. We got to go see what vibes with our fans, what they're interested in, and then we're going to go adjust. But our goal is to just put out a bunch of stuff initially so we get people excited, we get people educated, get people kind of like attuned to this new sport.
No, it's great. I got a couple questions for you. So I want to stick to, so if it's an autonomous, right? Who's actually controlling this? Like, is there a race track within like I'll be able to see it sort of like F1 and then you have someone on the ground who's controlling this? Or is this all simply programmed and they go up there and we see who's like built the best, sort of like an engine in F1? Give me a little explainer as to like who's actually racing here.
Absolutely. So it's a little bit of both. We are more akin to an FPV drone competition like Drone Racing League than a truly autonomous competition like some of the autonomous open wheel racing solutions that are out there. That said, we have a really interesting mashup of the two because the way space works, you're not always able to talk to your satellite unless, well, some people can, but many people can't, right? You might have like a 20-minute black spot as it's circling around the Earth. So you will have competitors who are partially actively commanding their satellite, telling it to rotate slightly to get a better sun angle or to propulse in this direction or that direction or to rotate again. That'll be happening live, and we're going to have live views into the mission ops rooms of all of our competitors. So think, these like a NASA ops center, so a big wall of TV monitors, engineers on computers madly typing away. Those are the people actually operating the satellites, and we're going to tell that story. But there will be times where competitions will turn on what autonomy solutions work better than not. Because if you can't always talk to your satellite, it's entirely possible that the decision that gets made that changes the course of an event is made autonomously, right? So we actually like that story because we're probably one of the very first sports where really an AI agent could be the story. AI could be the thing that defines whether a physical object completes a competition better than someone else or not. So we love that idea. Time will
Interesting.
tell what that balance looks like, but I'd say it's going to be about 75-25 of humans actively controlling and then some form of autonomy operating the satellite. And then to your question about what the actual course looks like, this is where AR becomes really, really helpful. So, of course, AR in sports world has become very, very commonplace, right? If you're watching an NBA game, half the stuff you see on the court isn't actually there, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of this, and it's usually in the sponsor context, but sometimes you'll see it also in the gameplay, right? I think the 10-yard line for NFL, right? That's not obviously there. That's an AR overlay. We're going to do the same thing, taking our existing modeling capabilities. So these are commercially available, really gorgeous software tools that image the Earth and then satellites flying around the Earth, and they're manipulable. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can change your angle. We can kind of produce it in a really beautiful way, and we can overlay onto that the course design. So that's this race architecture that my PhD in astrophysics is kind of going off and creating. And that's a series of maneuvers that are both designed to be exciting. So think like, again, these very, very fast 1,000-kilometer transfers combined with realism around, okay, well, what can our competitors actually execute on today, right? So one of the things, the thematics for us that's very important early on is we are very hyper realistic about what is executable today. And I'm confident that we can make something that's exciting to watch using that existing tech. But I worry that anyone trying to create something as new as this will immediately fail if we're at all unrealistic, right? Everything we do is tied to like exactly what the math says and industry says is executable today. So
Hmm.
that will then result in an AR overlay. And to basically think like, like Mario Kart, where they go to like the star section and you're like, up like on the Rainbow Road or whatever.
Yeah.
It's basically Rainbow Road, but like better produced.
Interesting. All right, so let's come back down to earth for a second, right? So now, all this is happening. If I go to my F1 world, right, it's manufacturer led, right? And like in any racing, right? And so I'm curious, like, are you tying in like OEM manufacturers of these crafts, and like they're using this as a way to continue to advance their technology but also socialize, or are you just buying them outright as a team owner and like then you get to go and like juice it up, and like how do you create competitive advantages? Who's sort of owning the team structure? Give me a
Sure.
little insight on that without going too nuanced.
Yeah, totally. In simple terms, right now, all of our teams are OEMs. They're
Okay.
companies that are out there building satellites primarily for defense customers who are asking for high maneuverability. So again, I've got this whole ecosystem of companies that are super well funded. There's a lot of money flowing through space that are building maneuverable platforms. And there's now, let's call it 60 is a fair number, 60 companies that are out building the right size and type of satellite that I want to go race. They have zero differentiation, right? Most of them
Yeah.
are very earlier in their development. We represent a proving grounds for them. We represent a marketing opportunity. We're a chance for them to go demonstrate to their eventual government, buyer, hey, look, our stuff works, right? And I mentioned, so we've got a handful of teams already signed up. All three of them are OEMs. All three of them have defense contracts. And the one that approached us originally, they're specifically around this. Like that, they've raised over $1 billion to build highly maneuverable satellites for Space Force. That's their entire business. And we are just an opportunity for them to go off and go say, hey, look, we are freaking phenomenally good at what we say we're good at, and we're going to go prove it. And we love that idea. So that's kind of like to the mission element of how we think about this, right? I come from defense world. I support the mission. I'm a patriot. Hell yeah. I want to do something commercial, but I also see ways for the commercial world to benefit defense operators, right? So for me, this is like ideal because we've got hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into defense acquisition for space systems. And a lot of space companies don't have like high data fidelity proven track records. And what I'm proposing is like, hey, bring your satellite. you race it, we're going to produce a bunch of data and content around it, and then there's going to be this unassailable, unquestionable excellence, and it's either going to be you won or you didn't. And if you didn't,
Mm.
shame on you, go try better. But if you won, we are the best possible marketing that you can ever possibly imagine. And companies understand that. And that has resonated really, really well with the companies that have signed up to be teams and those that we're still talking to. So we don't,
Oh,
however, want to
cool.
limit it to that, right? So we like the idea of bringing down the barrier to entry as well. So we want more participants rather than fewer because this is new. And I have to go kind of get people to go play. If people don't race, then I don't have a sport, right? So it's free to enter. And these people are already building satellites. So we're basically just saying, hey, bring your satellite. You're already building it and flying it and testing it. When you're done with your primary testing, reserve some propellant, come race, right? Dedicate, a couple weeks, a couple months of time on orbit, a little bit of what's called propellant budget, basically how much propellant they have to burn, reserve a little bit and come demonstrate how cool you are. And if you win, we're going to pay out a purse. We're offering up to $1 million in our first year for professional purses, right? So this is no entry fee required, cash winner, professionalized racing, where if you're good and you win, you get the best bragging rights and marketing position that you can possibly get in an ecosystem that's really hard to market in and really hard to position in because it's space. Space is hard to understand. It's hard to track. It's hard to get good data out of. We create that visibility. We create that high data fidelity. We create realism around engineering excellence. But final point, and I'm sorry,
Yep.
as an attorney, I
No,
will give you super
go.
long answers to every question you ask.
Just don't bill me for it, all right?
We also though like the idea, if you think about, let's say F1 is the analog, right? Yeah, so we've got a bunch of teams that are kind of OEM and manufacturer branded, right? But you also have some teams that are effectively funded by high net worth individuals that just like the idea of participatory racing. We love that idea. So we have one crypto investor who's expressed interest in potentially fielding a team. And this is just a guy who's done really well, who might come in and basically go buy a satellite and fund a couple of heads to go off and go operate it and go race and see what he can do. We love that idea because what people don't understand is that satellites aren't that expensive. So, when I'm talking about these, the top flight maneuverable platforms on a recurring basis, like once these things are scaling and kind of being, pumped off the production lines, they're a couple $1,000,000. Like we're not like well under 10, more than one or two, but they're somewhere in the single digits. That's not that bad. If you think about like what the entry level price, and not that bad in a world of like
I get it.
wild
Yeah, yeah.
wealth and inequality, caveat. In the greater scheme of like the racing ecosystem, for instance, if you're just getting into Ferrari Challenge or like the entry levels of open wheel racing, that's going to be about the same price point, right? Like if you want to go buy a car or two and go race them on the weekends, you're going to have to like pay for some techs and some tires and some maintenance and some motors. It's going to run you a few $1,000,000, right? So you want to go race a car, a couple $1,000,000. You want to go race a satellite, a couple $1,000,000. We're right there, right? So I think fundamentally, if you look at auto racing as the analog, well, hell, plane racing is way more expensive. But if you want to look at auto racing as the analog,
Yep.
we're not an unreasonable thing. And I think even looking at the moment in time we have here, right, with like Artemis missions and SpaceX going public, hell, there's what 20 more billionaires last week because of SpaceX and 450 new like centimillionaire, like 100 plus million. Like there's a lot of people with space background with a lot of money right now. If you've made $150 million overnight off your stock options, is it that big of an ask to say, hey, like, go put $2 or $3 million into like a speculative racing league? Not really, right? It's
No.
actually not that insane in the proportionality of other racing sports or the space industry broadly, where there's a ton of cash flowing around. So, anyways, that
Yeah.
was a long overview of the structure and the team structure, but that's how we're thinking about it.
Which is so interesting, right? Because I mean, sitting on this side, Phil, we get a chance to see all kinds of new sports coming out and what we'll call in the analog, right? Like, and I mean, it's sort of like, we're watching this renaissance moment that says, well, like humans just want to belong to something bigger than themselves, and sport is that binding agent. But we're also at it's unique inflection point of what makes us human, right? And so I think this is a really cool expansion of the frontier that says like, hey, we can still be human and it just doesn't have to take place on Earth, right? And so like this is really like sort of mind blowing, where you can take the same principles that we engage with in sport and what makes us love it, and then bring it out in outer space. Now my mind goes a little funny where it's like, are there crashes, right? Because it's the things in sport that like, I love NASCAR, but like I can only watch it go in a circle so many times. I want to see the crash, right? Or I want to see the finish. Do you see it being like that exciting type, like close race? Or is that something you're going to stitch together through short form content to really give the viewer that experience?
So Yes, but with a couple of conditions. And then let me back up and touch on something you just mentioned because I freaking loved it. So there is something intrinsically interesting about space, right? About how we think about ourselves and the cosmos. And this is why I think we're going to be successful. Space is the unknown, right? And we need to create this emotional connectivity, maybe through the drama, but also some intrinsic connectivity because it does create that tribe mentality, right? And tribes within sport are really important. So we need to find ways to go capture and engage at an emotional level with our fans because they're used to having that, like, oh, I'm a Boston fan, and oh, like, like I'm a New York fan, or the racing world of like I've got a cold beer sitting in my hand on a hot seat while a car drives by and my butt vibrates because like that visceral emotional human experience. We got to find ways to go connect that to racing refrigerators in space, right? Like it's hard, but I
It's
think
hard.
the beauty is it's space. There's actually this very human emotional thing that pre-exists. If you look at the beginnings of media, and like, so I studied art history, weirdly enough, back in the day. The very first art ever created by humans, right? Like the caves at Lascaux featured space, right? Orion's belt was all over it. If you look at the pyramids at Giza, their positioning based on the positions of the stars. If you look at art through the Renaissance, there's a million illustrations of how cosmology and the cosmos has been featured, right? Even more recently, we've had the most watched broadcast of all time was the moon landing, nearly twice the best performing Super Bowl. So like the top 10 list, it's 2 through 10 are Super Bowls. Number one is still the moon landing, right? And
Yeah.
when Artemis 4 takes humans back to the moon, they're going to have 250 million live viewers. That's nearly double the best performing Super Bowl again, right? So we're talking about these things that have, for whatever reason, we have a draw as people towards thinking what's up there. What does it mean about us? What does it mean about the human experience? And it's existentialism in a lot of ways. Freaking SpaceX gets 100,000 live viewers of a random rocket launch. Just like pick a random day where they're putting up like the next rocket. They're flying 10 that week. There'll be 100,000 people just watching the same old thing fly for the 40th time. And we just want to see it. So I think there is something
Yeah.
really intrinsic about space that I think is going to be attractive to people. We just need to figure out how to capture that magic and combine it with sports so that it's exciting. And that's, to your second point, the drama. That is probably one of our biggest risks is, right, how do we go and operate safely but also create some of that head-to-head dynamism, some of that risk, right? Because part of what this is, of course, is it's human risk, right? It's always human endeavor. It's what happens when things go wrong. What are you willing to risk in order to win? And part of that story can be the short format and can how we tell the story and package the content. Part of it can be the documentary content that we're going to start producing in January of next year to do like a sports doc, think like Drive to Survive, but following the lead up to the first year of racing in space. We're going to go try to create some of that drama around the technical development, like what works, what doesn't work, what broke, what doesn't break, what is going to make it to the launch pad in time, what's not, what's going to fail in space before they can even start racing, what doesn't, right? What, like, there's some drama there, but that I think is going to be a struggle to get it to be equivalent to Hamilton pulling in front of someone on, the third turn at Monaco, right? That's really hard to replicate, which is why F1 has been so successful. But in time, we'll get there, right? And again, this gets back to my idea of being hyper realistic about where we are today, what we can do today, and where we can take this when we move forward, right? So today, head to head, close quarters maneuvering, pretty hard to do. Just, as a fundamental reality, that level of control is very hard to do effectively. And for a lot of reasons, we wouldn't want our competitors super close together doing anything potentially dangerous, because if they do hit and they do collide and create debris, it's actually a pretty significant problem. But it doesn't mean we don't eventually get there. And we have some really interesting ideas around how to integrate it at lower altitudes, but still in space. So what I'm talking about is this area of low Earth orbit that's about 500 to 1,000 kilometers up. We could, however, do things a bit lower. So think 400 to 300 kilometers, what's called very low Earth orbit, where if you have something that goes wrong in that band, it doesn't really matter, because it's all going to fall back to Earth in a matter of months. So we have interesting ideas around having satellites kind of skip down into lower orbits and then perform kind of weird, maybe higher risk maneuvers in those lower orbits. So if something goes wrong there, well, that's fine. Okay, problem occurred, but no one is kind of harmed by it. So we are acutely aware of the need to create that drama, and we have a lot of ideas around how to do it. But again, we're like 120-ish days into this, right? Like we're still figuring it out. I got my first V1 of our race architecture from my engineer last week, right? So we're still just in the process of reviewing that and understanding it. But we have so many cool ideas about how we can go make this replicate that drama, right? So yeah, that's kind
Cool.
of foremost. Because again, most people I talk to think the risk is in like space operations and making it realistic. I'm like, no, I've got that. That's done. Like I've been in that world. I can do this. What the risk is for me is making it exciting and making it feel like premier sports. That is my risk.
Well, Phil, luckily betting continues to go hockey stick up and to the right, and we've seen that if you can bet anything, you can typically drive fan engagement. So I think that there's some things that might lend on the favor of fan engagement. As we turn the corner here and start to wind this thing down, one more structural question and then a couple rapid fires.
Yeah.
Talk to me about compliance. Like, it is incredibly challenging to do a road race in St. Petersburg, and it takes a whole year of planning and permitting. What is this like in space where we have more of these, vehicles floating around than we actually know, satellites? How do you find clearance to be able to actually race and not interfere with the existing infrastructure or where it's going in the future?
Yeah. So this is the beauty is I am a regulatory attorney who's done this in the space industry for a very long time. So there's not that many people who understand this process soup to nuts, but I am one of them. So I've written every kind of license you can imagine. I've done FAA
There's
license.
a moat, my friends. We
I
talk
know.
about moats all day. That is a moat, my friend.
Exactly, right? Because there's not that. So I've done, again, like my two claims to fame is I'm one of the few people who understands soup to nuts how to take pictures of things in space from space. That's a very particular kind of imagery that is technically very hard to do. I've done it. And I'm one of the few people that understands the entire life cycle of space licensure, and has had it go terribly wrong in every way you can imagine. So I know all the things not to do, and all of which is public. So happy to talk about that as well, if that's helpful. But no, fundamentally, what we're proposing here is very much within lines of the best practices from an operational perspective, so that we see no risk from a licensing perspective. And additionally, the way we've structured the business is that we're actually not licensing anything. So the league itself is going to go through a separate licensure process effectively with the sports world, and happy to talk about what that looks like. We've started an organization in Paris to go be the FIFA or FIA for orbital sport, to force best practices and safety and sustainability responsibility efforts into the industry. Because I'm not the only person out here talking about sports in space. UFC is talking about doing a fight on a space station. There's a lot of elements of this that require some form of light initial oversight, but we need to be having those conversations now so that we're being responsible about creating content in space. Because the worst thing for me selfishly is if someone else does something stupid, then the entire new industry as it's evolving gets. So I'm leaning very forward to make sure that the best practices of safety and responsibility and sustainability are in place from day one. For us, though, we're a pure play company, right? So we're not operating these satellites. Our teams are operating the satellites. So they're the ones who have to go off and go do their licensure. And we're already working with them very closely to make sure that they simply adjust that licensure to include the dynamic maneuver bounds that we're talking about. So they're already going and doing maneuverable missions. We're just saying, add these additional maneuvers to your license to authorize them, and that's it. And we're intentionally designing these so we're not doing these maneuvers in congested areas. We're going to uncongested parts of space because obviously we don't want to be doing stupid stuff. And then similarly for the optics providers, right? The Overwatch capability, the ground-based capability, to the extent that they're obligated to get licensure, absolutely. But they're already doing it. That's already their business, right? They're already out there, which is weird enough. There's already dozens of companies providing space-to-space imagery today. So they're already out there operating and licensing satellites. We just tell them to keep on doing what they're doing. But the obligation to comply is on them. So from our perspective, This is actually kind of gorgeous, right? And this is just me not wanting to write the licenses because I've done it for a decade of my career. We don't have to, right? So we expect all of our partners to, adhere to best practices, to follow the appropriate laws, to go off and go get the licenses. And I know all these companies, right? I know they're doing the right stuff. I know the lawyers that work at these companies, right? These are good, responsible humans, right? So everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing. We've already also started outreach with the regulators, both in the US and abroad, so that they understand we're doing this, right? We're very public about it. We talk about it. And again, we're leaning very far forward into the safety and responsibility element. So I don't see any issues there, but there is some paperwork and we're working through that with our teams now.
Super cool. Super cool. Phil, as we were going through this, and leading up to it, my grandfather passed away a couple years ago. And as he was winding down, I asked him the most memorable thing of his lifetime. And he said it was landing on the moon. It was winning the space race. And I couldn't help but think as we were going through this where, we talk about the OEMs, but there's something about this national pride, right? We got the World Cup going on right now. It hits a little bit different when the US wins versus an MLS or a Premier club. I'm curious, and you touched on it with it being in France. What is the rest of the world? Like, do you see a race to space beyond the moon and sort of like owning this space sport category? Like, give me a little futuristic of like, what is the next space race? Is it driven by companies? Is it driven by countries? Like, what do you see if you were to wave the magic wand, rub the magic ball as to what this is going to look like in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I think 5 years is going to look a lot like today. 10 years, we're going to start to see democratization, right? So what the US dominated industry of today has demonstrated is that there's real commercial opportunity and defense opportunity here. The rest of the world is playing catch up and they're doing it very, very fast. And we're building for that reality. So we are trying very hard to be globalized from day one. So again, we've structured the business so that we're not subject to a lot of the traditional restrictions of what US companies can and can't do with foreign companies, because we want to have that nation layer competition, right? In time, we would love to see a Russian team racing a British team or a Chinese team racing a US team. We think that's healthy. If you look at the history of like sports and geopolitics, it's actually been generally a good thing, right? We've had Russia US hockey during the Cold War was actually a thawing in relations, right? I mean, US China ping pong. There's been like sports has played a good role, I think, in a lot of things in the geopolitical arena. So we like that idea. Although I would flag that another podcast I was on actually took issue with the idea of like, well, if we were racing the Russians and we lost, well, that's terrible. Why would we want to participate? And I was like, well, that's the nature of sport. Like if we don't win, we should try harder next time, right? Like that's not, you don't not participate because you might lose. Like that's nonsense. So we love that idea.
What an interesting take. Hold on. That's just such an like when you think about that just from a participatory lens, like how do you go through anyways, like that's I couldn't just gloss over that. That's
the difference between it's like the self-protective national security world where everything is like very closely held and you just don't do anything unless you're certain you're going to win. And then sports world where it's all about effort and fate and magic and the potential for what can be, right? And that's why I love this matchup, right? It's interesting. But yeah, so again, we love the idea of an egalitarian global effort here. And I think broadly, to really answer your question about kind of like what do I see, it's the application layers, right? We're no longer in the back to the internet analogy. We're no longer in the like, let's go build switches and lay fiber cables and stand up servers. That's being done. That's largely done, right? And they're going to continue to do it. Those parties are already defined, right? They're already funded. They're off doing it. What is interesting now is we're moving into like the aughts and the teens, right? Where like social media became a thing, and suddenly these like application layers got built on top of that infrastructure, and they created totally novel value. Like the things that people just didn't even understand were interesting or useful suddenly popped up and like, oh my God, like look what the internet's caused. This is great. And I think we're at that point. So I think the next 10 years, we're going to see that rise. It's going to be the rise of the applications that are built on top of that infrastructure. And I think media and sports content is going to be right there. It's going to be along with communications capabilities, perhaps weird integrations with social media. You've already seen that with X and SpaceX now being tied up. I think that's an interesting play, which we can dive into maybe later. And yeah, so I think that's where we are. It's the beginning of the application age.
Wow. And I think we're going to go part two because there's so much more to cover that like, I mean, it's a healthy stop point here. And like, we'll pick this back up and continue to follow the journey because this is hands down far and away one of the most exciting conversations I've had, Phil, because it's taking all of the tried and true commercial levers that we see of sport and now not going and playing in the same box where everyone is at, right? It's truly blue ocean. And I think it allows the imagination to flow again, right? It allows like, what is west of the Mississippi, right? Is there really gold over there? And like, am I going to make it to a point where like I can see the fruits of my labor, or am I just going to be the one that paves the trail for future generations to take advantage of? And man, to be able to sit in the cockpit as you navigate this is going to be an exciting ride. I think last question for you as a student of the game, right? Like you're doing things at a very high level where I think the fringe is participating. Phil, how do you get smarter? Where are you paying attention and learning to make sure that you're relevant in a space that is truly changing and evolving daily?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think on the space side, that's me just keeping up with my network, right? And that is like I've been, arguably a thought leader. I've written a couple of things over the years, right? I have a big network of people in space world. Love that. I got to keep up on that. Sports world, though, is really where I'm focused, right? And that's been a big time commit for the first half of this year has been going to every industry event you can possibly imagine and networking my ass off to go off and go talk to everyone and get every intro and have all the opinions. And that is really the big challenge for me right now. Again, like my existential challenge is how do I go produce content that's like feels like and looks like and is engaging as every premier sports property. But to get there, I've got to go get smart on sports and media. So that's like my advisor ecosystem that I'm building out. They're all people from the entertainment world. They've done professional sport, they've done TV, they've done movies, they've done communications, and that is where I'm focused. That is what I need to go get smart on, and that's going to be kind of a continual learning curve for a while. Like I can't in good conscience say like, oh, I'm going to understand everything about media in 6 months. Like, no, it's going to take years, but I'm going after it with gusto. I have a plan. I've got the right resources. I've got the right people helping me. And I think we're going to get there. And my goal is to just not make stupid mistakes in this learning curve period. And I've got a little bit of time, right? I've got maybe 18 months before we're really out there doing race operations. And that means I've got, 6 months, 12 months to really get smarter and then build on that over time. So,
and I think the beautiful point is like we're in a renaissance moment of sport, right? And we're able to look back at what's worked. But just because that's what got us here isn't going to be what gets us where we need to go, right? So whether that's traditional properties or thinking about space racing, I think we're all sort of in this bucket of like, what is the next formula to be able to tell the story, drive engagement, and fulfill not just the legacy consumer, but the Gen Z, the Gen Alpha, the next wave of consumer. And I think that's where you're primed to go ahead and meet this younger generation where they're at. And so, I mean, look at Phil from the Profluence team, sincerely thank you for challenging and pushing the boundaries farther beyond, what my imagination lets us go sometimes. If people want to get involved, if we have media moguls that are listening, Phil, what's the best way to get in touch or learn more about Atlas Cup?
Yeah, so we're easy to find. We're up on all the social channels. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active. You can go to the website, atlascup.com, pretty straightforward. You can Google space racing. I think we're the first or second hit out there. So we're easy to find, and I would say log in now, like now, follow now. We're going to have content coming out starting in about 4 or 5 weeks. So more to come, but we're just spinning things up now. So we're still blocking and tackling, but there's a lot coming out in the second half of the year.
Love it. All right, last question before we part ways, Phil. If you had the opportunity, would you go to space?
Hell no. No, I like trees and dogs and like physical books. Like I think it's cool. Like, don't get me wrong. Maybe
you wouldn't go as much as you work in it. You wouldn't go.
Maybe when I'm like 85 and it's like been de-risked to the point that it's as safe as like air travel, like maybe. But like space is terrible. Like I want to see it. Don't get me wrong. Like I want to have that experience of like seeing the Earth with the stars in the background, like that the Overwatch like idea, right? But no, it sounds so, I don't know. I'm
shit. I would have lost a ton of money at the end of this interview. I thought in spades you would have said absolutely. Because the follow-on was, are you going to go up there and wave the flag for the first race? I just think there's something so euphoric about that, but there's also something on the other side where I don't have to in order to go ahead and launch a space league. Maybe that's the cliffhanger that we come back and pick up as you guys build, but damn it, save me a seat, man, because I would go. Like, I can't wait to go and like be able to look and gain a new perspective of what it's like to look back at Earth and to do it while spectating one of your races. Feels like there's no better time than now, right?
Yeah, love it. Yeah, many thoughts about how to integrate humans. I mean, there's an entire world of like, Hilton has a deal to build a space hotel. There's a lunar hotel in works. I mean, there's going to be lots of human in space opportunities. We love all of them, right? There's, again, long history of hospitality and racing, so we love it. But for me, not for me. I'll be happy with my feet in the grass.
Well, as the CEO and founder of it, stay safe, keep building. Thank you again for everything you're doing, and we'll do it again soon, my friend.
Sounds good. Really appreciate it, Scott. Thank you.
Talk soon.